So the second place that the Lord led me to was 2 Kings chapter 4, and we are looking at the woman from Shunem. Okay, so it might not always be negative related. It might not be that we've been hurt or we've been rejected or we've been taunted or we have felt like our heart's desire hasn't been understood and will be dismissed, or we might not fear judgment. It may actually come from a conviction. It may actually come from the Lord to, in certain company, refrain our words and refrain our thoughts. So here we are. We're in 2 Kings chapter 4. And if you're not familiar with this story, a lady had been approached by, let's see. So one day Elisha returned to Shunem, and he went up to the upper room. He said to the servant Gehazi, "Tell the woman from Shunem I want to speak to her." When she appeared, Elisha said to Gehazi, "Tell her, we appreciate the kind concern you have shown us. What can we do for you? Can we put in a good word for you to the king or to the commander of the army?" "No," she replied. "My family takes good care of me." Later, Elisha asked Gehazi, "What can we do for her?" Gehazi replied, "She doesn't have a son, and her husband is an old man." So Elisha says, "Call her back." When the woman returned, Elisha said to her as she stood in the doorway, "Next year, at this time, you will be holding a son in your arms." So, opposite of Hannah, this woman from Shunem, she didn't want a child. She wasn't asking for one. She wasn't heartbroken for one, but because she had done something good unto the Lord, there was a blessing that this individual believed was in order. So he wanted to bless her with a child. Well, this child comes into her life, it's raised, and then suddenly the child dies. And so she is kind of like, okay, now what do I do? And so she lays her boy down in an upper room, and she takes off. She takes off on a walk, and she runs into, start at 25, 2 Kings 4:25. As she approached the man of God at Mount Carmel, Elisha saw her in the distance. He said to Gehazi, "Look, the woman from Shunem is coming. Run out to meet her and ask her, is everything all right with you, your husband, and your child?" The woman says, "Yes, everything is fine." So I want to stop right there. How many of us, when we are asked how we're doing, we say, "We're just fine. I'm fine. I'm fine." You know, because we just want to make sure that everything's fine. We ourselves want to believe that we are fine. Now, in this instance, I'm not convinced that that is what the woman is doing. I don't think that she is just trying to slough anything off. I think that she is on a mission. She is on a mission she is trying to remain in faith that once she gets to the man of God who represents the presence of God, that her faith will then eventually resurrect her son, which is exactly what happens. But let's learn a few things here. So she fell to the ground before him and caught hold of his feet, and she was deeply troubled. Well, from there, she's told by Elisha, "Get ready to travel, take my staff, and don't talk to anyone along the way." All right, so here we are. Couple of lessons to glean in this lesson with the Shunem woman in 2 Kings chapter 4. So we may choose to hold on to our faith in what appears to be a dead and impossible situation rather than doubt. So sometimes when we are experiencing what appears to be barrenness or death, or like a dream is lost, or a marriage is over, or health is never going to return, or you're never going to achieve that high calling that you sense God had, led you to, we may need to keep our lips sealed for a season in order to get into the presence of God and hear from Him and receive His instruction. And we also, as we learned from Elisha, we may receive a direct instruction from God to not say anything to anyone on our way back. It may be that clear that we just need to keep our lips sealed for a season and just trust and have faith in God. Okay, so one thing that I want to go back to here, so with Hannah and with the Shunem woman, they fell at the feet of the Lord. They threw themselves at the feet of the Lord, and it says here, she was praying to the Lord. And in verse 15, "I am very discouraged and am pouring my heart out to the Lord." So in both cases, both of these women, Hannah and the woman from Shunem, they poured their heart out before the Lord. They poured their heart out before him. So that is as if it is our antidote. It's as if it's our antidote to feeling like we are unable to be vulnerable with people. They were first vulnerable with God. And if you hang on a second, that is exactly where we are headed. So back to 2 Kings chapter 4, where we hear, or we might deduce, that the woman was choosing to be silent on her way to Elisha and on her way back from Elisha, to hold on to that faith and to not allow the opinions of people to slip in, and to not allow the mocking of people to come in. And that was part of why she appeared to not be vulnerable, but when she was actually listening to the Lord. So yeah, that's an Old Testament reference, you may say, but let's look at Mark 5. So Jesus dealt with this as well. So while he was still speaking to her, this is the woman with the issue of blood for 12 years, messengers arrived from the home of Jairus, and the leader of the synagogue. They told him, "Your daughter is dead. There's no use troubling the teacher now." But Jesus overheard them and said to Jairus, "Don't be afraid, just have faith." Then Jesus stopped the crowd and wouldn't let anyone go with him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw much commotion and weeping and wailing. He went inside and asked, "Why all this commotion and weeping? The child isn't dead. She's only asleep." Okay, so what happens next? The crowd laughed at him. What did he do? Did he just keep on going? No. He made them all leave. And he took the girl's father and mother and his 3 disciples into the room where the girl was lying. Holding her hand, he said to her, "Talitha koum," which means, "Little girl, get up." And the girl, who was 12 years old, immediately stood up and walked around. So here's an example of Jesus dealing with unbelievers or laughers or mockers or scoffers. And he basically, rather than just ignore them going to and coming from the miracle that he was headed to and from, he just said, "Out, leave." There is no room for lack of faith in this space, for this miracle, in this time, and in this season. So sometimes, if we do a little recap with the Shunem woman combined with Mark in the example in chapter 5, sometimes our silence that may be perceived as vulnerable, of lack of willingness to be vulnerable, is actually an instruction from the Lord, or a hunch or a sense from the Holy Spirit to just remain silent for a little bit until God does what he needs to do. Okay?